There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a house at 2 in the morning, the kind most people over 60 have come to know intimately, whether they've ever talked about it or not. The ceiling looks the same as it did an hour ago. The clock on the nightstand seems to glow a little too brightly, and somewhere in that stillness, a familiar, frustrating question surfaces again. Why does sleep feel so different now than it did 20 or 30 years ago? Not necessarily worse in every sense, but different in a way that's hard to put into words and even harder to explain to anyone who hasn't lived through it themselves. Sleep is one of those things nobody thinks much about until it starts to change. For most of adulthood, falling asleep and staying asleep happens without a second thought, an automatic process the body handles quietly in the background every single night. But somewhere in the years after 50, and increasingly through the 60s, 70s, and beyond, that automatic process starts to shift. Falling asleep might take a little longer. Waking up once or twice during the night becomes far more common than it used to be. And that deep, uninterrupted stretch of sleep that once felt guaranteed starts to feel more like something that has to be earned. This is one of the most universal and least explained parts of aging, and understanding why it happens is not about diagnosing insomnia or any other sleep disorder. It's about giving people the same kind of plain, clear information a doctor would want them to have, long before frustration turns into genuine worry about what these changes actually mean. So let's talk about what's actually happening to sleep as the body ages, why waking up at night becomes so much more common, and why so much of what people blame on stress or bad habits may actually trace back to changes in the body's sleep architecture that have very little to do with willpower at all. The first thing worth understanding is that sleep itself is not one uniform state that a person simply falls into and out of. It's a structured cycle made up of distinct stages: light sleep, deep sleep, and REM sleep, each occurring in a particular pattern that repeats several times throughout the night. Researchers refer to this repeating pattern as sleep architecture, and it's a genuinely useful concept because it explains so much of what changes with age. In younger adults, a much larger proportion of the night is spent in deep sleep, the stage most associated with feeling physically restored and rested. As the decades pass, the amount of time spent in deep sleep gradually decreases, while lighter stages of sleep make up a larger share of the night. This isn't a flaw or a malfunction. It's simply how the architecture of sleep naturally shifts over a lifetime, the same way many other biological rhythms change gradually with age. Sleep isn't one thing, it's a structure, and with age, that structure quietly rearranges itself. This shift toward lighter sleep has a very direct and very common consequence: waking up more easily and more often during the night. When a person spends more time in light sleep, even small disturbances, a change in room temperature, a partner shifting position, a distant sound, the need to use the bathroom, become far more likely to pull them into wakefulness. In deep sleep, the same disturbances would often go completely unnoticed. This is one of the primary reasons so many people describe waking up 2, 3, or even 4 times a night as they get older, when in their 30s and 40s they might have slept through the entire night without stirring at all. It's not that something is broken, it's that the threshold for staying asleep has quietly become more sensitive. There's also a specific and very common reason behind one of the most frequently mentioned nighttime disruptions: the need to use the bathroom. As people age, the bladder's capacity to hold urine overnight can gradually decrease, and the kidney's pattern of producing urine can shift, sometimes concentrating more fluid production into the evening and nighttime hours rather than spreading it evenly throughout the day. Researchers refer to this pattern as nocturia, and it becomes increasingly common with age, affecting a significant portion of adults over 60 to some degree. This is not something to feel embarrassed about or frustrated by. It's an extremely common, well-documented pattern that overlaps directly with the lighter, more easily disrupted sleep already happening for other reasons. Combined together, These two factors alone explain a large share of the nighttime waking so many people describe but rarely have explained to them in plain terms. Hormones play a significant and often underappreciated role in this story as well. Melatonin, the hormone most closely associated with regulating the sleep-wake cycle, is produced by a small gland deep in the brain called the pineal gland, and its production naturally tends to decrease with age. Melatonin doesn't force sleep the way some people imagine. It's more like a signal that helps synchronize the body's internal clock with the darkness outside. As natural melatonin production declines, that signal can become somewhat weaker, which may contribute to both difficulty falling asleep initially and a greater likelihood of waking during the night. This is genuinely useful to understand because it reframes many of these sleep changes not as personal failures or the result of doing something wrong, but as a natural shift in the body's internal signaling system that becomes less robust over time. A weaker signal doesn't mean a broken system. It means the body is asking for a little more support than it used to need. The body's core temperature rhythm is another piece of this puzzle that almost never gets discussed outside of sleep research circles. Body temperature naturally drops slightly in the evening as part of the process that helps initiate sleep, and it rises again gradually toward morning as part of the process that helps a person wake up. Research suggests that this daily temperature rhythm can become somewhat flatter and less pronounced with age, meaning the signal that once helped clearly separate wakefulness from sleep becomes a little less distinct. This is part of why some older adults describe feeling neither fully awake nor fully asleep during parts of the night, a kind of hovering state that can feel deeply unsatisfying even when actual total sleep time hasn't changed all that dramatically. Circadian rhythm shifts add another layer to this picture. The circadian rhythm is the internal, roughly 24-hour clock that governs when the body feels naturally inclined towards sleep and wakefulness, and research has consistently shown that this rhythm tends to shift earlier with age. This is why so many older adults notice they start feeling tired earlier in the evening than they used to, and correspondingly wake up earlier in the morning, sometimes well before they'd actually like to. This isn't a sign of anything going wrong. It's simply the internal clock recalibrating itself to a different schedule than the one it kept for most of adulthood. And understanding this can genuinely ease the frustration of waking at 4 in the morning, feeling fully alert, when the expectation was to sleep until 7. There's a quieter physical thread running through many of these nighttime disruptions that deserves honest mention as well. Joint discomfort or muscle stiffness that becomes more noticeable when lying still for extended periods, restless legs that seem to act up specifically at night, or breathing patterns that become less steady during sleep, including a pattern called sleep apnea, in which breathing briefly stops and starts repeatedly throughout the night, often without the person ever fully waking up enough to remember it. Sleep apnea becomes considerably more common with age, and it can dramatically affect sleep quality even in people who technically remain asleep through most disruptions, since the brain still responds to each brief pause in breathing with a small stress signal, even if full wakefulness doesn't follow. This is precisely the kind of pattern that deserves a real conversation with a doctor rather than guesswork, since proper evaluation can distinguish between ordinary age-related sleep changes and something like sleep apnea that genuinely benefits from medical attention. Medications deserve honest acknowledgement here too, without venturing into specific drug names or dosages that belong in a conversation with a pharmacist or physician rather than a general awareness video. Many commonly prescribed medications for conditions that become more common with age, including certain blood pressure treatments, medications affecting the nervous system, and others, can have side effects that influence sleep patterns, sometimes causing more frequent nighttime waking, sometimes affecting how rested a person feels even after a full night in bed. This is exactly the kind of overlapping factor that becomes much clearer during a medication review with a doctor or pharmacist, someone who can look at a complete list of prescriptions and understand how they might be interacting with the body's naturally changing sleep architecture in a way no general information source ever could. It's worth pausing here to say something important. None of what's been described so far means something is wrong, or that a person's sleep has become fundamentally broken. These are simply patterns that researchers and sleep specialists have observed occurring gradually across large populations of older adults. Every person's sleep ages differently, shaped by genetics, activity level, stress, overall health history, and countless other individual factors no general video could ever fully account for. Two people who are both 70 years old can have remarkably different sleep experiences, and that's precisely why this kind of information is meant to build understanding, not to suggest that any particular pattern of waking is automatically cause for alarm. That said, there are certain patterns worth being aware of, simply so people know what falls within the range of common experience and what might genuinely be worth mentioning to a doctor. Waking up once or twice most nights, taking a little longer to fall back asleep than in younger years, or feeling naturally sleepy a bit earlier in the evening are all things an enormous number of older adults describe as part of ordinary aging. Awareness of these patterns isn't about alarm. It's about paying attention to one's own body with curiosity, understanding the reasons behind the change rather than assuming it's either something to fear or something that should simply be endured in frustrated silence. This naturally raises the question of when these observations become worth bringing to a doctor. If daytime sleepiness becomes significant enough to interfere with normal activities, if a bed partner has ever mentioned loud snoring paired with pauses in breathing, if waking up gasping or short of breath happens with any regularity, if legs feel persistently restless or uncomfortable specifically at bedtime, or if the overall pattern of sleep disruption feels like it has changed suddenly rather than gradually, these are all reasonable and worthwhile things to raise at a regular checkup. A physician can properly evaluate for conditions like sleep apnea, review medications for sleep-related side effects, and discuss the many effective, evidence-based approaches available for improving sleep quality at this stage of life. Connecting all these pieces together in a way general awareness content never could. This isn't about waiting until exhaustion becomes overwhelming. Many of the most effective conversations with a doctor happen precisely because someone mentioned a subtle, persistent pattern early, rather than assuming nothing could be done about it. The right time to talk to a doctor about sleep is usually much earlier than most people think to bring it up. There's a genuinely hopeful thread running through this entire topic that deserves real attention. While certain aspects of sleep architecture do shift with age in ways that can't be fully reversed, research consistently shows that sleep quality can still be meaningfully supported and improved through a range of everyday habits and practices, often collectively referred to as sleep hygiene. Maintaining a consistent sleep and wake schedule, even on weekends, helps reinforce the body's circadian rhythm rather than working against its natural shift. Getting exposure to natural daylight earlier in the day, particularly in the morning, has been shown in research to help strengthen the body's internal clock signal. Limiting caffeine intake in the afternoon and evening, since caffeine's effects can last considerably longer in the body than many people realize, helps prevent it from interfering with the natural process of falling and staying asleep. Keeping the bedroom cool, dark, and quiet supports the body's natural temperature drop that helps initiate and maintain sleep. And engaging in regular physical activity during the day, even something as simple as a daily walk, has been consistently linked in research to improve sleep quality. Though timing matters, since vigorous activity too close to bedtime can sometimes have the opposite effect. None of these are treatments in the medical sense, and none of them are being presented here as guaranteed solutions to any specific sleep condition. They are simply the kinds of general lifestyle patterns that sleep researchers have repeatedly associated with supporting better sleep quality as the body's natural rhythms shift with age. The body doesn't lose its ability to rest well after 60. It simply asks for a slightly different kind of support to get there. Perhaps the most important reframing in all of this is recognizing that changes in sleep with age are not a sign of failure or a verdict about declining health in some broader sense. They are, instead, a natural evolution of the body's internal rhythms, systems that have been running continuously for 6, 7, or 8 decades and have simply recalibrated their timing and depth along the way. Understanding that recalibration, rather than measuring current sleep against an idealized memory of how sleep felt at 30, tends to be one of the most genuinely relieving shifts a person can make in how they relate to their own nights. It replaces frustration with understanding, and it replaces the quiet dread of another restless night with informed, realistic expectations paired with practical steps that can actually help. So many people quietly assume that waking up repeatedly through the night is simply something to be endured without explanation, a private frustration nobody else could possibly understand. But there is a real physiological explanation behind nearly all of it, rooted in genuine sleep science, and understanding that explanation doesn't require alarm or resignation. It requires the kind of calm, clear information that turns a mysterious, isolating nighttime experience into something a person can actually think through, discuss openly, and bring to their next doctor's visit with confidence rather than quiet embarrassment. If any of what's been described here sounds familiar, that's not a reason for concern on its own. It's simply an invitation to pay closer attention, to notice patterns without immediately assuming the worst, and to bring those observations to a healthcare provider who can look at the complete picture. Every person's sleep tells its own story, shaped by decades of individual history no general video could ever fully capture. What matters most is staying curious about that story rather than silently enduring it, and treating conversations about sleep not as an admission that something has gone wrong, but as one of the most practical, genuinely helpful conversations a person can have with their own doctor. Understanding how sleep changes with age is not about fear. It's about walking into the next stage of life with real information instead of guesswork, and with a healthcare provider as a genuine partner in finding what kind of rest actually works for one specific, unique person, rather than trying to figure it all out alone at 2 a.m. If you've noticed any of these patterns in your own nights, the most valuable next step isn't lying awake wondering what it means. It's bringing these observations to your doctor, who can look at your complete health picture and help you understand what's happening in a way that's specific to you.